Naomi Hayes had been a foster care social worker for 7 years, and in that time, she had seen things that would break most people. Children abandoned in dumpsters, babies left in hospital bathrooms, toddlers found wandering streets in the middle of the night. She had held crying children who asked why their parents did not want them, had sat with teenagers who had aged out of the system with nowhere to go, had watched good kids slip through the cracks because there were never enough resources, never enough homes, never enough people who cared. It was exhausting work that paid barely enough to cover her rent in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, but Naomi could not imagine doing anything else. She was 32 years old, had deep brown skin that glowed even when she was tired, natural hair that she usually wore in a high puff or twist out, and eyes that held both compassion and a fierce determination that had served her well in a system that tried to break everyone who worked in it. She was not married, had never been close, and most of her friends had stopped inviting her to things because she was always working, always taking calls at midnight, always choosing other people's children over her own social life. Her mother called once a week from Atlanta to ask when Naomi was going to settle down, find a good man, have her own babies. Naomi always gave the same answer. "These are my babies, Mama. All of them." It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of cold that cut through your coat and made your bones ache. When Naomi came home from a 14-hour shift that had started with a court hearing and ended with placing a sibling set of 3 with an emergency foster family. She was exhausted, hungry, and looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and whatever leftovers she could find in her refrigerator. She was climbing the stairs to her second-floor apartment, keys already in hand, when she heard it. A sound that made her freeze mid-step, made her heart stop, made every instinct she had honed over 7 years scream at her to pay attention. It was a cry, thin and weak, coming from somewhere near her door. Naomi took the last few stairs 2 at a time, and that is when she saw it. A car seat, the cheap kind you could buy at any big box store, sitting directly in front of her apartment door. And inside, wrapped in a thin blanket that was completely inadequate for the freezing November night, was a baby. A newborn, maybe a few weeks old at most, with light brown skin and a face scrunched up in distress as it cried weakly, the kind of cry that said it had been crying for a while and was running out of energy. Naomi dropped to her knees, her work bag sliding off her shoulder and hitting the floor with a thud she barely registered. Her hands were already reaching for the car seat, lifting it, checking the baby with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been trained for exactly this situation. The baby was breathing, which was the most important thing, but it was cold, too cold, and there was something about the weakness of its cry that terrified her. She fumbled for her keys, got her door open, and brought the car seat inside, kicking the door shut behind her and immediately carrying the baby to her living room, where she could see it better under the lights. The baby was a boy, she determined quickly, and he could not have been more than 3 weeks old. His little face was red from crying, and when she gently touched his forehead, he was much too cool. Not dangerously hypothermic yet, but getting there. He was wearing a onesie that was clean but cheap, and the blanket was thin and worn, like someone had grabbed whatever they had available. There was no note, no diaper bag, nothing but the car seat and the blanket and this tiny human who had been left on her doorstep like an Amazon package. Naomi's professional training kicked in even as her heart broke. She needed to call the police. Needed to. Report this through proper channels. Needed to do everything by the book. But first, she needed to make sure this baby was okay. She gently lifted him out of the car seat, and he let out a stronger cry at the movement, which was actually a good sign. It meant he had energy to protest. She held him against her chest, sharing her body heat, and grabbed her phone with her free hand. The next 2 hours were a blur of phone calls, police reports, and paramedics checking the baby over in her living room. The paramedics said he was dehydrated and cold but otherwise seemed healthy, no signs of abuse or neglect beyond being left outside in the cold. The police took photos, took statements, and said they would be in touch. Child Protective Services sent an emergency caseworker, a tired woman named Sharon who Naomi had worked with before, and they agreed that since Naomi was a licensed foster parent, the baby could stay with her temporarily while they tried to figure out who he was and where he came from. When everyone finally left and Naomi was alone with the baby, she sat on her couch and just looked at him. He had finally fallen asleep after she fed him a bottle, and he was lying in a nest of blankets on the couch cushion next to her, his little face finally peaceful. He was beautiful, with long eyelashes and a perfect little nose and tiny hands that were curled into loose fists. Someone had carried this baby for 9 months, had given birth to him, had held him at least long enough to put him in a car seat and bring him here. And then that someone had left him on a stranger's doorstep in the cold and walked away. Naomi reached out and gently traced one finger down the baby's soft cheek. "I've got you," she whispered. "You're safe now. I promise." She did not know yet that this promise would change everything. Did not know that the man who had fathered this child was already looking for him. Did not know that in 3 days danger would move in next door and turn her quiet. Life upside down. The next morning, Naomi called in to work to take a few emergency days off. Her supervisor, a woman who had known her for years, did not even question it. In 7 years of working together, Naomi had taken maybe 10 sick days total. If she was asking for time off, it was because she genuinely needed it. The baby, who Naomi had started calling Daniel because she had to call him something, and it felt wrong to just say the baby, needed to see a pediatrician for a full checkup. He needed proper clothes and diapers and formula. He needed someone to hold him and feed him and keep him safe, while the system tried to figure out where he had come from. But more than any of those practical concerns, Naomi found that she simply could not bear to leave him with anyone else yet. She had held him all through the night after everyone left, too afraid to put him down, too worried that if she took her eyes off him for even a moment, something terrible would happen. It was not logical, this fierce protectiveness. She had fostered newborns before, had gone through the same process of midnight feedings and diaper changes and soothing crying babies. But something about Daniel felt different. Maybe it was the way he had been left on her doorstep specifically, like someone had chosen her, trusted her. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his tiny face when she first saw him crying in that inadequate blanket. Or maybe it was simply that her heart, which had been giving pieces of itself away for 7 years, had somehow found room for one more child to love. When she called the pediatrician's office and explained the situation, they got her in that same afternoon. Dr. Patricia Chen had been Daniel's assigned doctor since he came into emergency care, and she was thorough and kind as she examined him. Naomi sat in the exam room holding Daniel, while Dr. Chen checked his reflexes, listened to his heart, measured his length and weight, and asked questions about how he was eating and sleeping. "He is doing remarkably well considering the circumstances," Dr. Chen said, making notes in his chart. "Full term, good weight, no signs of fetal alcohol syndrome or drug exposure. His mother took good care of herself during pregnancy, whatever her reasons were for leaving him. That counts for something." "Do you see this a lot?" Naomi asked. "Babies just abandoned?" Dr. Chen's expression was sad. "More often than you would think. Young mothers who are terrified, women who cannot afford another child, teenagers who hide their pregnancies until it is too late. The reasons are all different, but the outcome is the same. A baby who needs a safe place to land." Naomi looked down at Daniel, who was dozing peacefully in her arms, completely unaware of how precarious his first few weeks of life had been. "He has that now," she said quietly. "A safe place. Thanks to you." Dr. Chen smiled at her. "You are one of the good ones, Miss Hayes. Most people would have called 911 and handed him off to the first responder who showed up. But you opened your home and your heart. That baby is lucky you were the one who found him." Naomi felt her throat tighten with emotion. Sometimes she wondered if she was the lucky one, if these children she fostered gave her more than she could ever give them. They reminded her why she did this work, why she kept opening herself up to heartbreak. They reminded her that love was always worth it, even when it hurt. Naomi spent that first day setting up her spare bedroom as a nursery. She had fostered babies before, so she still had a crib and a changing table, but everything else needed to be bought new. She made a run to Target with Daniel in a carrier strapped to her chest, and she bought more baby supplies than one newborn could possibly need. But she could not help herself. This baby had been left with nothing, and she was going to make sure he had everything. By the end of the first day, Daniel had a wardrobe of soft onesies, a drawer full of blankets, more bottles than he could use in a month, and every kind of baby care product Naomi could think of. She set up a corner of her living room with a bouncer and a play mat, even though he was too young to use them yet, and she hung a mobile over his crib that played soft lullabies. When she finally put him down to sleep that night in his new crib, she stood in the doorway of the nursery for a long time, just watching him breathe. she knew better than to get attached. She had been doing this work long enough to know that foster care was temporary, that her job was to love these children fiercely while also holding them loosely enough to let them go when the time came. But there was something about Daniel, something about the way he had looked at her when she picked him up off her doorstep that had already worked its way into her heart. The second day was more of the same. Doctor appointments, more shopping, and hours of just holding Daniel and talking to him softly while he slept or ate or stared up at her with those wide, dark eyes. Naomi had fostered 12 children over the years, ranging from newborns to teenagers, and she had loved every single one of them. But she had to admit, there was something different about having a baby this small, this helpless, who needed her for absolutely everything. On the third day, which was a Friday, Naomi was making lunch when she heard sounds coming from the hallway. The apartment next to hers, Unit 210, had been empty for almost 2 months. The previous tenants had moved out suddenly, and the landlord had been doing renovations before putting it back on the market. Naomi had enjoyed the quiet. Truth be told, she worked with noise and chaos all day long, and coming home to silence had been a luxury she appreciated. But now, there were definitely sounds of someone moving in next door, heavy footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved, voices speaking in what sounded like Italian. Naomi was curious but not concerned. She figured she would meet the new neighbor eventually, maybe bring over some cookies or something to be welcoming. She had no way of knowing that the man moving in next door was there specifically because of her, or more accurately, because of the baby currently sleeping in her arms. That evening, as Naomi was giving Daniel his 8 o'clock feeding, there was a knock on her door. She was not expecting anyone, and she felt a small flutter of nervousness as she carefully put Daniel in his bouncer and went to check the peephole. Standing in the hallway was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was slightly too long and pushed back from his face, olive skin, and a face that was striking in a way that was almost severe. He was wearing expensive clothes, a black sweater and dark jeans that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made her hesitate. She opened the door but kept the chain on. "Can I help you?" The man's eyes, which were a striking dark brown, focused on her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "I am Matteo De Luca," he said, and his voice was deep and accented. Italian, she thought. "I just moved into the apartment next door. I wanted to introduce myself." Naomi relaxed slightly. A new neighbor introducing himself. That was normal. That was fine. She unhooked the chain and opened the door properly, managing a smile. "Nice to meet you, Mr. De Luca. I'm Naomi Hayes. Welcome to the building." Matteo De Luca did not smile back. Instead, his eyes moved past her, scanning what he could see of her apartment behind her, and Naomi felt that nervousness return. There was something calculating in his gaze, something that made her professional instincts kick in. This man was looking for something. "You live alone?" he asked, and the question was casual, but something about it felt wrong. Naomi's hand tightened on the doorframe. "That's a pretty personal question for a first introduction." His eyes snapped back to her face. "My apologies," he said, though he did not sound particularly sorry. "I am simply trying to get to know my neighbors. This is a safe building, yes? Very safe." Naomi kept her voice pleasant but cool. "Was there anything else you needed, Mr. De Luca?" Before he could answer, Daniel let out a cry from inside the apartment, the kind of cry that said he was hungry and wanted attention now. Naomi saw Matteo's entire body go rigid, saw something flash across his face that she could not quite read. Was that recognition? Shock? She could not tell. "You have a baby," Matteo said, and it was not a question. "I'm a foster parent," Naomi said carefully. "I care for children who need placement. How many children do you have currently?" The question was quick. Too quick. And Naomi's instincts were now screaming that something was wrong with this conversation. "Mr. De Luca, I don't think that's any of your business." Naomi's voice was firm now. "If you'll excuse me, I need to tend to the baby. It was nice meeting you." She started to close the door, but Matteo put his hand on the doorframe, not aggressive but enough to stop her. His eyes were intense, almost desperate. "How old is the baby?" Naomi's heart was pounding now. There was something in his face, something in his eyes, that made Naomi pause. Against every instinct telling her to shut the door and call building security, she found herself answering, A few weeks. I found him abandoned on my doorstep 3 days ago. Why are you asking? Matteo De Luca closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, there was a devastation there that took Naomi's breath away. Because, he said quietly, I think he is my son. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible and yet somehow making terrible sense. Naomi's mind was racing. The timing was right. The location was right. Someone had specifically left Daniel at her door, at the apartment of a foster care social worker. But why? You need to leave, Naomi said again, but her voice was less certain now. If what you're saying is true, you need to go through the proper channels. Contact Child Protective Services. Submit to DNA testing. Go through the courts. I cannot do that. Matteo's voice was urgent. Please, I just need to see him. I need to know if it is him. Daniel's cries were getting louder, more insistent. Naomi looked at this stranger standing in her doorway, at the expensive clothes and the desperate eyes and the accent that spoke of a world she knew nothing about, and she made a decision that she knew she was probably going to regret. Wait here, she said. Don't move. She closed the door, leaving him in the hallway, and went to pick up Daniel. The baby settled immediately once he was in her arms, his cries subsiding to small whimpers. Naomi stood in her living room for a long moment, holding this child who she had already started to think of as hers, and she knew that whatever happened next was going to change everything. She went back to the door and opened it, Daniel held securely in her arms. Matteo De Luca had not moved. He was standing in exactly the same spot, and when his eyes fell on Daniel, Naomi watched his face transform. There was recognition there, instant and unmistakable, and also something that looked like grief and rage and relief all mixed together. That is him, Matteo said, and his voice was rough, almost breaking. That is my son. How do you know? Naomi challenged, even though she could see it herself now, could see the resemblance in the shape of the baby's nose, the set of his eyes. He's only a few weeks old. How can you be certain? Because I know. Matteo's eyes had not left Daniel, and because 3 weeks ago, the woman who was carrying my child disappeared. She left me a note, saying she could not raise a baby in my world, that she was going to give him up for adoption. I have been searching for her ever since, searching for him. And then yesterday, one of my people reported seeing a woman matching her description in this neighborhood 3 days ago. I moved in next door this morning, because I needed to search this building. I never expected to find him so quickly. Naomi's arms tightened protectively around Daniel. Your world. What does that mean? Matteo met her eyes, and there was a resignation in his face. It means I am not a good man, Miss Hayes. It means I do things that would horrify you. It means my son's mother was right to be afraid of what his life would be like with me. But he is still my son, and I will not leave him. The words sent a chill down Naomi's spine. She thought about the expensive clothes, the way he carried himself, the way he said my people like he had an organization behind him. She thought about the intensity in his eyes and the casual way he admitted to not being a good man, and she thought about every training session she had ever had about keeping foster children safe from dangerous situations. You need to go through the proper channels, she repeated, but her voice was less certain now. I can't just hand a baby over to someone claiming to be his father. I am not asking you to hand him over. Matteo's voice was careful now. I understand that you are protecting him, and I respect that, but I am asking you to let me be part of this process. Let me prove that I am his father. Let me do whatever I need to do legally to get custody. But please, do not shut me out. Do not make me go to war to get my son back. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Naomi knew in that moment that Matteo De Luca was exactly the kind of dangerous she had been trained to recognize. But she also saw a father looking at his son with an expression that was pure, undiluted love. It was a contradiction that made her head spin. I'll make you a deal, she heard herself say. You go through the proper legal channels. You submit to DNA testing. You work with CPS. You do everything by the book. And in the meantime, I won't prevent you from visiting Daniel, from being present while all of that is happening. But you have to promise me that you won't try to take him, that you won't do anything that would put him or me in danger. Can you do that? Matteo looked at her for a long moment, and Naomi had the distinct impression that he was weighing whether to simply take what he wanted by force. She held Daniel a little tighter and met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. Finally, he nodded. You have my word, he said. I will do this your way, the legal way. But Miss Hayes, you should know that once the DNA test proves he is mine, I will do whatever it takes to bring my son home. Whatever it takes. Understood. Naomi's voice was steady even though her heart was pounding. Then I suggest you start making phone calls, Mr. DeLuca. The sooner you contact CPS, the sooner we can get this process started. Mateo nodded again, his eyes never leaving Daniel. Tomorrow, he said. I will make the calls tomorrow. But tonight, please, can I just look at him? I have been searching for him for 3 weeks, wondering if he was alive, if he was safe. Please. Naomi hesitated, then stepped back and opened the door wider. 5 minutes, she said. You can come in for 5 minutes, and then you need to leave and let me put him to bed. Mateo stepped into her apartment like he was stepping into sacred space. He moved carefully, keeping his distance from Naomi but unable to take his eyes off Daniel. The baby, who had been falling asleep against Naomi's shoulder, opened his eyes at the sound of a new voice and looked directly at Mateo. For a moment, father and son just stared at each other, and Naomi felt something in her chest crack open at the expression on Mateo's face. He is perfect, Mateo said quietly. Is he healthy? Has he been eating well? The pediatrician says he's perfectly healthy, Naomi said, her voice softening despite herself. A little dehydrated when I first found him, but that's been corrected. He's eating well, sleeping well, no health problems that we can see. And you found him on your doorstep. Mateo's voice was rough. In the cold. Yes. Naomi could not quite keep the judgment out of her voice. Someone left him outside my apartment in a thin blanket on one of the coldest nights of the year. If I had come home even an hour later, he might have been seriously hurt. She was afraid. Mateo's eyes were still on Daniel. His mother, she was terrified of me, of what I am, of what kind of life our son would have. She thought leaving him with a foster care social worker was the safest choice. She probably watched to make sure you found him. Do you know where she is now? Naomi asked. Mateo shook his head. She disappeared. She could be anywhere. I have people looking, but I think she does not want to be found. And what will you do if you find her? The look Mateo gave her was dark. That depends on whether she wants to be part of our son's life or not. But either way, she does not get to make decisions about him without me. He is my blood, my heir. He belongs with me. The possessive words should have terrified Naomi. Instead, she found herself thinking about how many fathers she had dealt with over her years in foster care, who did not care, who signed away their rights without a second thought, who treated their children like burdens they were eager to be free of. Mateo DeLuca might be dangerous, might be involved in things she did not want to know about, but he clearly wanted his son. That counted for something. Your 5 minutes are up, Naomi said gently. I need to put him to bed. Mateo nodded but did not move immediately. Can I? He hesitated, clearly uncertain. Can I touch him? Just once? Naomi hesitated, then moved closer. She turned, so that Daniel was facing Mateo, and she watched as this dangerous man reached out with one hand and gently, so gently, touched his son's cheek. Daniel made a small sound and turned his head toward the touch, and Mateo let out a shaky breath. Mio filio, he whispered. My son, I promise you, I will make this right. I will bring you home. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back. Thank you, he said to Naomi, for taking care of him, for keeping him safe. I will never forget that you were the one who protected him when he needed it most. Before Naomi could respond, Mateo turned and left, pulling her apartment door closed behind him with a soft click. Naomi stood in her living room, holding Daniel and trying to process what had just happened. She had just made a deal with a man who was almost certainly a criminal, had agreed to let him be part of a foster child's life before any legal framework was in place. She could lose her license for this, could lose her job, could end up in serious trouble. But when she looked down at Daniel's face, at those dark eyes that looked so much like his father's, she could not bring herself to regret it. I hope I just made the right choice, she whispered to the baby, because if I didn't, we're both in trouble. Daniel just yawned and closed his eyes, completely unconcerned. Naomi carried him to the nursery and put him down in his crib. And as she watched him sleep, she wondered what kind of storm she had just invited into her life. The next morning, Naomi woke to find a package outside her door. Inside was a state-of-the-art baby monitor system, the kind that cost several $100s, and a note in strong, masculine handwriting. So you can rest easier. MD. She should have been annoyed at the presumption, should have returned it. But instead, she found herself setting it up in Daniel's room, grateful for the extra security. She told herself it was practical, that it was for Daniel's safety. But she knew she was already making compromises she never thought she would make. Over the next week, Matteo De Luca became a fixture in her life. He called CPS the day after their first meeting, and he must have had lawyers who were very good at what they did, because the wheels started turning faster than Naomi had ever seen in her 7 years working in the system. DNA tests were scheduled, paternity hearings were put on the calendar, and suddenly Matteo had official supervised visitation rights while everything was being processed. Naomi was the supervisor, which was unusual but not unheard of in emergency placement situations where the potential parent had no history of violence and the foster parent was willing. 3 times a week, Matteo would knock on her door at exactly the appointed time, and she would let him in to spend an hour with Daniel. He would sit on her couch and hold his son, would talk to him in Italian and English, would watch him with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. Were awkward. Matteo clearly did not know what to do with a newborn, did not know how to hold him properly or support his head or interpret his different cries. But he learned quickly, asking Naomi questions and watching carefully how she did things. By the 3rd visit, he could change a diaper without fumbling, could tell when Daniel was hungry versus tired, versus just wanting attention. He was patient in a way that surprised her, never getting frustrated when Daniel spit up on his expensive suits or cried through the entire visit. It was during the 2nd week of visits that Naomi started to see beyond the dangerous exterior to the man underneath. Matteo arrived one evening looking exhausted, his usual composed demeanor slightly cracked. He held Daniel carefully but stiffly, and Naomi noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Rough day?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him with a cup of tea. "You could say that." Matteo's voice was rougher than usual. "One of my warehouses was inspected today. Everything was in order, but the stress of it, the need to make sure every detail was perfect." He shook his head. "I am tired of always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the next threat." "Is that why Daniel's mother left?" Naomi asked gently. "Because she did not want that life for him?" Matteo was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on his son's sleeping face. "Yes," he finally said. "Sophia. She saw what my life was truly like. The late-night calls, the men with guns who came to meetings, the way I could never fully relax even in my own home. She said she could not raise a child in that environment, that she would always be afraid something would happen to him because of me. Do you blame her?" "No." Matteo's voice was heavy. "How can I? She was right to be afraid. My world is dangerous. My enemies would not hesitate to target a child if they thought it would hurt me." But he looked up at Naomi with fierce eyes. "That does not mean I love him any less. It does not mean I will not do everything in my power to protect him and give him the best life possible." Naomi felt something in her chest shift at those words, at the raw honesty in his face. This was not a man trying to gain custody out of pride or obligation. This was a father who loved his son and was terrified of failing him. "You are going to be a good father," she said quietly. "I can see it in how you are with him, how hard you are trying to learn. Daniel is lucky to have you fighting for him." Matteo looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And he is lucky to have had you saving him, protecting him. You gave him what I could not, a safe place when he needed it most." "I will never forget that, Naomi. Never." It was the first time he had used her first name, and hearing it in his accented voice sent warmth through her that she tried to ignore. This was a professional relationship, she reminded herself. She was Daniel's foster parent, and Matteo was working toward custody. Whatever attraction she felt needed to be pushed aside. But over the following weeks, pushing aside her feelings became increasingly difficult. Naomi started learning things about Matteo during these visits that complicated the dangerous man narrative she had constructed. She learned that he called his mother every single day without fail, that he sent money back to cousins in Sicily who were struggling, that he had paid for the college education of 3 children whose fathers had been killed working for his organization. She learned that he was fiercely loyal to the people he considered family, that he operated by a code of honor that was old-fashioned and absolute, that he treated women with a respect that seemed at odds with his ruthless reputation. And she learned that he could be surprisingly gentle with Daniel, that he would sing Italian lullabies in a voice that was rough but tender, that he looked at his son with such love it made her heart ache. There was one evening when Daniel was particularly fussy, crying inconsolably despite Naomi's best efforts to soothe him. Matteo had watched her walk the floor with the baby for 15 minutes before he stood and crossed to her. "Let me try," he said quietly. "Sometimes babies can sense stress, and you are tired." Naomi wanted to protest that she was fine, that she could handle it, but the truth was she was exhausted. She had been up most of the previous night with Daniel and had worked a full day before this visit. She handed him over and sank onto the couch, watching as Matteo held his son against his chest and began speaking in rapid Italian, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the room. And incredibly, Daniel began to settle. His cries faded to whimpers and then to small, hiccuping sounds as he nestled into his father's broad chest. Within 5 minutes he was asleep, his tiny fist curled around Matteo's collar. "What did you say to him?" Naomi asked, fascinated. "I told him. About Sicily." Matteo's voice was barely above a whisper. "About the village where I grew up. About the sea and the lemon groves and the mountains. About his Nonna who is waiting to meet him. About the family that is eager to welcome him home. I told him he is loved, that he is wanted, that he will never be alone again." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. "That is beautiful." Matteo looked at her, his dark eyes soft in the lamplight. "You have given him security these past weeks. I want him to know he will have roots too, a history, a place he belongs." They stayed like that for the rest of the visit, Matteo holding Daniel and Naomi curled up on the couch, and they talked. Really talked. Not the careful professional conversation they usually maintained, but honest discussion about their lives and fears and hopes. Matteo told her about losing his mother when he was young, about how his father had raised him to be strong, to never show weakness, to protect family above all else. He told her about coming to America at 16, speaking barely any English, about building a life from nothing through sheer determination and willingness to do what others would not. And Naomi told him about her own struggles, about choosing social work, knowing it would break her heart over and over, about the children she had lost to the system or to circumstance, about how she sometimes felt like she was fighting a battle she could never win. She told him about her fear that she was giving away so much of herself to other people's children that there would be nothing left when she was finally ready to have her own family. "That will not happen," Matteo said with certainty. "You are not the kind of person who runs empty, Naomi. You fill yourself back up with the love you give, with the purpose you find in helping others. That is your strength. How can you be so sure? You barely know me." Matteo's eyes were intense on hers. "I see you," he said simply. "I see how you are with Daniel. How you fight. For him, even though you know you will have to let him go. I see your strength and your compassion and your fierce determination to make the world better for children who have nothing. I see you, Naomi Hayes, and I am in awe of you." The words hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her heart race. No one had ever looked at her the way Matteo was looking at her right now, like she was extraordinary, like she was someone worth admiring. In her work, she was used to being appreciated but also taken for granted, used to being the person who handled the hard cases and the impossible situations because that was just what she did. No one had ever acted like that was something special. "You should not say things like that," she managed. "This is supposed to be professional. I know, but it is also true. And I have never been good at holding back truth." "Matteo," Naomi started, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. "I should go," Matteo said, carefully standing with Daniel still asleep in his arms. "Where should I put him?" "His crib is in the nursery. I will show you." They walked together down the hall, and Naomi watched as Matteo laid Daniel down with infinite care, pulling the blanket up, and standing there for a long moment just watching him sleep. Then he turned to her, and in the dim light of the nursery with his son sleeping peacefully between them, something shifted. Naomi started learning things about Matteo during these visits. She learned that he had grown up in Sicily, that he had come to America when he was 16, that his mother had died when he was young, and his father had raised him in what he carefully referred to as the family business. She learned that he could be surprisingly gentle with Daniel, that he had the patience to sit through diaper changes and spit up and crying Jags without ever losing his temper. She learned that despite Everything he clearly was and everything he clearly did. He loved his son with a fierceness that took her breath away. And against her better judgment, against every professional boundary she had ever been taught to maintain, Naomi started to like him. It started small. The way he always brought her coffee when he came for his visits, having somehow figured out that she took it black with 1 sugar. The way he noticed when she was tired and would insist on holding Daniel for the full hour so she could rest. The way he listened when she talked about her work, asked intelligent questions, showed genuine interest in the children she cared for and the system she navigated. Then there were the bigger things. The day she came home to find her building's broken front door had been replaced with a new security system. The way her landlord suddenly became very responsive to maintenance requests after months of ignoring her complaints. The fact that the broken streetlight outside her building that had been out for a year was suddenly working again. "Are you doing this?" she asked Matteo one evening during one of his visits. "The door, the maintenance, all of it?" Matteo looked up from where he was giving Daniel a bottle. "You live in a building with inadequate security and a landlord who does not care about his tenants' safety. I simply encouraged him to care more." "How did you encourage him?" Naomi asked, though she was not entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Matteo's smile was dark. "I have friends who are very good at explaining the importance of proper building maintenance." Naomi should have been alarmed, should have put her foot down and insisted he stop interfering. But she lived in a building where women were regularly harassed in the hallways, where packages got stolen from the lobby, where she never felt entirely safe coming home after dark. And now, suddenly, those problems were disappearing. It was hard to be mad about that. "You can't just solve all my problems with intimidation," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Watch me," Matteo said, and went back to feeding his son. The DNA results came back after 2 weeks, and they were exactly what everyone had expected. Matteo DeLuca was Daniel's biological father, with 99.9% certainty. The next step was a hearing to determine custody, and Naomi's supervisor at CPS warned her that given Matteo's resources and the lack of any criminal convictions on his record, despite what everyone suspected about him, he would almost certainly be granted custody. "How do you feel about that?" Sharon asked during one of their supervision meetings. Naomi thought about that question for a long time before answering. She had Daniel for a month now, and despite knowing better, despite every rule about not getting attached, she loved him. He was part of her daily routine, part of her heart. The thought of giving him up hurt in a way that surprised her with its intensity. But when she was honest with herself, she had to admit that what scared her even more than losing Daniel was the realization that she was going to miss Matteo too. Over the past weeks, he had become part of her life in ways she had not expected. They had developed an easy rapport during his visits, had fallen into patterns that felt almost domestic. He would come over and they would sit on her couch together, taking turns holding Daniel, talking about their days, arguing about everything from the proper way to burp a baby to the best Italian restaurants in Brooklyn. And there were moments, quiet moments, when Matteo would look at her holding his son, and the expression on his face would be so intense, so heated, that it made her breath catch. Naomi was not naive. She recognized attraction when she felt it, even when it was completely inappropriate and possibly dangerous. But knowing it was inappropriate did not make it go away. "I think Daniel belongs with his father," Naomi finally said in response to Sharon's question. "Matteo loves him, wants him, can provide for him. That's more than most kids in the system get." Sharon looked at her searchingly. "And how do you feel about Mr. DeLuca?" Naomi kept her expression carefully neutral. "He's Daniel's father. My feelings about him are irrelevant." Sharon did not look convinced, but she let it drop. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. The night before the hearing, Naomi could not sleep. She lay in bed listening to Daniel breathing through the baby monitor, thinking about how tomorrow she would probably lose him, thinking about how in a week or 2 or 3, someone else would be giving him his bottles and changing his diapers and watching him sleep. Someone else would get to see his first smile, hear his first laugh, watch him grow up. She got out of bed around midnight and went to the nursery, standing in the doorway and just watching Daniel sleep like she had every night since she found him. She did not hear the knock on her door until it came a second time, soft but insistent. Frowning, she went to check the peephole and found Matteo standing in the hallway. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled like he had been running his hands through it, and he looked as tired as she felt. Naomi opened the door. It's midnight. Is everything okay? I cannot sleep, Mateo said bluntly. Tomorrow I get my son back, and I should be celebrating, but instead I am lying in my apartment thinking about how you are going to lose him. He hesitated. Can I come in? Naomi should have said no. Should have maintained boundaries. Should have protected herself. But she was tired of being strong, tired of pretending she was not hurting, and Mateo was the only person who might understand. She stepped back and let him in. They ended up on her couch, sitting at opposite ends, both of them staring at the baby monitor that showed Daniel sleeping peacefully. The silence stretched. Between them, comfortable but heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. I am sorry, Mateo finally said quietly. I know you have grown to love him. I see it every time you look at him, and I am taking him from you. You're his father. Naomi's voice was steady even though her eyes were burning. He should be with you. That's what's best for him. But what about what is best for you? Mateo turned to look at her. You have cared for him, protected him, loved him. You found him when he needed help most. You matter in this equation too, Naomi. It was the first time he had used her first name, and something about hearing it in his accented voice made her chest tight. The system doesn't care about what I want. My job is to do what's best for the child, not what makes me happy. Then, the system is cruel. Mateo's voice was hard. It asks you to love children and then rips them away from you over and over again. How do you survive that? Naomi looked at him, at the genuine concern in his eyes, and felt something inside her crack. I don't know, she admitted. Most days I feel like I'm breaking a little more, watching pieces of my heart walk out the door with every child I say goodbye to. But if I stop doing this, if I stop opening my home and my heart, then who will? There aren't enough people willing to do this work, Mateo. These kids need someone to love them, even if it's just temporary, even if it hurts like hell when they leave. You are a better person than most people will ever be, Mateo said softly. And you deserve more than this pain the system keeps inflicting on you. What I deserve doesn't matter. Naomi's voice broke on the last word, and she put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. She was not going to cry in front of him, was not going to be weak, but Mateo did not look at her like she was weak. He looked at her like she was the strongest person he had ever met, and also like he wanted to burn down the entire world for making her cry. He shifted closer on the couch, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. And he spoke in Italian, soft words she did not understand, but that sounded like comfort, like promises. What did you say? She asked, her voice wobbly. I said that you deserve everything, Mateo translated, his dark eyes intense on hers. You deserve to keep what you love. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who will protect you the way you protect everyone else. Mateo, Naomi started, but she did not know what she was going to say, did not know how to articulate the confused tangle of feelings in her chest. I am going to tell you something, Mateo continued, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that? Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. When I moved into this building, it was because I was searching for my son. I would have torn this entire city apart to find him. And when I saw him in your arms that first night, when I knew he was safe and cared for, I felt relief like I have never known. He paused, but I also felt something else. I looked at you standing there, holding my son, protecting him like a lioness, refusing to be intimidated by me, and I felt something I have not felt in many years. What did you feel? Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. Mateo leaned closer, and she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. He could smell the faint scent of his cologne. I felt like I had found something I did not know I was looking for. Not just my son, but the woman who was brave enough to save him. The woman who opened her door to a stranger because she could not stand the thought of a child suffering. The woman who has spent the last month caring for Daniel like he was her own, knowing she would have to give him up. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his hand. I am falling in love with you, Naomi Hayes. And tomorrow when I take my son home, I do not want to leave you behind. Naomi's breath caught. She should pull away, should tell him this was inappropriate, should maintain every professional boundary she had been taught. But instead she found herself leaning into his touch, found herself wanting things she had no right to want. You can't say things like that, she whispered. You don't even really know me. I know enough. Mateo's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she had not realized had fallen. I know you are strong and kind and beautiful. I know you fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. I know my son is safe and loved because of you. What else do I need to know? You need to know that I'm terrified of you, Naomi admitted. Not because I think you'll hurt me, but because I think you could make me want things I've convinced myself I can't have. A family, a partnership, someone who stays instead of leaving. I do not leave the people I care about, Mateo said with certainty. When I commit to something, to someone, it is forever. That is how I was raised. Family is everything. Your family is the Mafia, Naomi said bluntly. You're asking me to ignore everything I know is right, everything I've built my career on, to be with someone who operates outside the law. I am asking you to see me for who I am, not what I do, Mateo corrected. Yes, I have power. Yes, I use it in ways that are not always legal, but I use that power to protect what is mine, to make sure that people I care about are safe and provided for. Is that so different from what you do? You work within a system that is broken and corrupt, that fails more children than it saves. We both do what we have to do to protect the innocent. It was a argument that should not have made sense, but somehow did. Naomi thought about all the times she had bent the rules to keep a child safe, all the times she had worked around the system instead of through it because it was the only way to get things done. Was she really in a position to judge Mateo for doing the same thing, just on a much larger scale? What are you actually proposing here? She asked. Because I can't just become part of your life overnight. Mateo's hand was still cupping her face, his thumb still moving in soft circles that were making it very hard to think clearly. I am proposing that when I take Daniel home tomorrow, you come with us. Not as his foster parent, not as a social worker, but as part of our family, as someone I care about, someone I want in my life and in my son's life permanently. You're talking about moving in together. We've only known each other a month, and I have made life and death decisions faster than that, Mateo said. I know what I want, Naomi. I want my son under my roof where I can protect him, and I want you there too, teaching him to be kind, showing him what it means to care about others, balancing out all the darkness he will inherit from me. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are both safe. I want to come home to you both every night. I want to give you the family you have been giving to everyone else for 7 years. Let me do this. Let me take care of you the way you have taken care of my son. Naomi's mind was spinning. This was insane. She barely knew this man. He was dangerous, possibly a criminal, definitely not someone she should be considering building a life with. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw someone who understood her in a way no one else ever had, someone who saw her strength and her vulnerability and valued both. And more than that, she saw someone who was offering her exactly what she had been afraid to want: a family, a place to belong, a man who would not leave. This is crazy, she whispered. Yes, Mateo agreed. But sometimes the crazy choice is the right one. Sometimes you have to trust what you feel rather than what you think you should feel. And if it doesn't work, if I can't handle your world, then I will make sure you and Daniel are still taken care of, still protected. But Naomi, I do not think you are someone who runs from difficult things. I think you are someone who stays and fights for what matters. And I am asking you to fight for this, for us, the way you fight for everyone else. Naomi closed her eyes, thinking about going back to her empty apartment after tomorrow's hearing, thinking about watching Mateo walk out with Daniel and never seeing either of them again, thinking about spending the next however many years saying goodbye to children she loved, being strong for everyone but herself, protecting everyone but herself. And then she thought about saying yes, about stepping into the unknown with this dangerous man and his infant son, about choosing to build something instead of always watching what she built get torn apart. She opened her eyes and looked at Mateo, at the hope and intensity and heat in his expression. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll try. I'll come home with you and Daniel tomorrow, and I'll see if I can handle your world. The smile that spread across Mateo's face was brilliant, transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. He surged forward and kissed her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other wrapping around her waist to pull her close. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or uncertain. It was possessive and demanding and full of promise, and Naomi kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been denying for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matteo rested his forehead against hers. "You are mine now," he said, and there was satisfaction and wonder in his voice. "Mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to love, and I take care of what is mine. Tesoro." Naomi should have been bothered by the possessive language, should have pushed back against the idea of belonging to anyone, but after years of standing alone, of being strong because she had no choice, there was something deeply appealing about having someone claim her, about having someone say mine and mean I will defend you against anything. "What does tesoro mean?" she asked. "Treasure." Matteo kissed her again, softer this time. "It means treasure, because that is what you are to me, something precious that I will guard with my life." They stayed on the couch for a long time after that, wrapped around each other, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Matteo told her about the house he owned in Park Slope, a brownstone with a garden and enough space for Daniel to grow up in. He told her about his mother, Maria, who lived in a wing of the house and would love having a baby around again, would love meeting the woman who had saved her grandson. He told her about his business interests, carefully skirting around the illegal aspects but being honest enough that Naomi could read between the lines. And Naomi told him about her own childhood, about growing up in a loving but chaotic household in Atlanta, about her younger siblings and the way her mother had always taken in neighborhood kids who needed a meal or a place to stay. She told him about why she became a social worker, about the little girl she had known in high school who had been in and out of foster care and ended up dead before she turned 20. She told him about her fears and her hopes and all the ways the system had broken her heart. By the time the sky started lightening outside her windows, they had learned 100 small things about each other, had shared the kind of late-night honesty that only comes when two people decide to stop being careful and start being real. And when Matteo finally left to go back to his own apartment to shower and get ready for the hearing, Naomi stood in her doorway and watched him go, feeling like she had just stepped off a cliff and was still waiting to see if she would fly or fall. The custody hearing went exactly as expected. The judge reviewed the DNA evidence. Reviewed Matteo's financial stability and the home study that had been rushed completed on his brownstone, and granted him full custody of Daniel with the understanding that CPS would do periodic check-ins for the first 6 months. Naomi sat in the courtroom and listened to it all, feeling both heartbroken and relieved. Daniel was going home with his father. That was the right outcome, and she was going with them, which was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After the hearing, Matteo drove them to his house in a sleek black car that probably cost more than Naomi made in 2 years. Daniel was in a new car seat in the back, sleeping through all the drama, and Naomi sat in the passenger seat trying not to panic about the fact that she had packed 2 suitcases of her belongings and was moving in with a man she had known for a month. When they pulled up in front of the brownstone, Naomi's first thought was that it was beautiful. 4 stories of red brick with bay windows and a front garden that was meticulously maintained despite it being November. It looked like the kind of house where a family lived, where a child could grow up happy and safe, the kind of house Naomi had dreamed about but never thought she would live in. Matteo came around to open her door, and he must have seen the nervousness on her face because he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "This is your home now," he said. "You belong here as much as Daniel and I do. No one will question that. No one will make you feel unwelcome. I promise you that." Naomi squeezed his hand back and got out of the car. She could do this. She had survived 7 years in foster care, had handled situations far more dangerous than moving in with a mafia boss. She was going to be fine. The inside of the house was even more beautiful than the outside, with hardwood floors and high ceilings and furniture that managed to look both expensive and comfortable. Matteo gave her a quick tour, showing her the main floor, with its living room and formal dining room and modern kitchen, and then the second floor where Daniel's nursery had already been set up, complete with every piece of equipment they had in Naomi's apartment, and more. "This is your room," Matteo said, opening the door to a bedroom at the end of the hall. It was spacious and bright, with a king-sized bed and an attached bathroom and huge windows that looked out over the garden. "Next to it is Daniel's nursery, and my room is across the hall. I want to be clear that there are no expectations here, Naomi. You will have your own space, your own privacy. What happens between us happens at your pace." Naomi looked at the beautiful room, at the thoughtfulness of giving her space while still keeping her close to Daniel, and felt her last bit of resistance crumble. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding, for not rushing me." Mateo stepped closer and tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "I am a patient man when it comes to things. That matter," he said. "And you matter, Tesoro. You and Daniel are my family now, and I will do whatever it takes to make you both happy and safe. That is my promise to you." Then he kissed her forehead and left her to settle in, and Naomi stood in her beautiful new room in her beautiful new home with this dangerous, passionate man she was falling for, and thought that maybe, just maybe, she had made the right choice after all. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Naomi was used to living alone, used to her own space and her own routines, and suddenly she was part of a household that included not just Mateo and Daniel but also Maria, Mateo's mother, who was a force of nature in her own right. Maria was in her 60s, a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, and she ruled the kitchen and most of the rest of the house with an iron fist. She spoke mostly Italian mixed with heavily accented English, and she had opinions about absolutely everything from how to properly fold laundry to the correct way to make red sauce. At first, Naomi was worried that Maria would resent her presence, would see her as an interloper trying to take over her grandson, but instead, Maria embraced her with a warmth that was overwhelming. She insisted on teaching Naomi family recipes, on sitting with her in the evenings and sharing stories about Mateo's childhood, on treating her like a daughter rather than a guest. It was the kind of maternal attention Naomi had not experienced since she left home, and she found herself soaking it up like a plant that had been kept in the shade finally finding sunlight. Mateo was attentive but careful, clearly trying to give Naomi space to adjust while also making his interest very clear. He worked most days, leaving early in the morning and not returning until evening, but he always made time for dinner with the family, always spent an hour with Daniel before bed, always found reasons to seek Naomi out and talk to her, touch her, remind her that he was there. And Naomi, despite all her reservations, found herself falling harder every day. She loved watching Mateo with Daniel, loved the way this dangerous man became completely soft when holding his son, loved the way he talked to the baby in Italian and English and made up silly songs to make him smile. She loved the way he treated his mother with respect and affection, the way he made sure Naomi had everything she needed before he even thought about himself, the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. It was not perfect. There were moments when Naomi saw the other side of Mateo's life, when men in expensive suits would come to the house for meetings behind closed doors, when Mateo would take phone calls in Italian that ended with him barking orders in a tone that made clear he was used to being obeyed. There were nights he came home late with tension in his shoulders and blood on his knuckles that he tried to hide from her. There were times she caught glimpses of the violence that lurked beneath his polished surface, but there were also moments of such tenderness that they took her breath away. The morning she woke to find Mateo had already gotten Daniel up and fed him breakfast so she could sleep in. The evening he took her to her old apartment to pack up the rest of her things and held her while she cried over giving up her independence. The night she had a nightmare about one of her former foster kids and woke to find Mateo sitting on the edge of her bed, having heard her through the baby monitor, ready to comfort her without being asked. It was 6 weeks after moving in when things finally shifted between them. Naomi had put Daniel to bed and was in the kitchen making herself tea when Mateo came home from whatever business he had been handling. He looked exhausted, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart clench. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring him a glass of whiskey without being asked, having learned that he liked to wind down with a drink after difficult days. Mateo took the glass and drank half of it in one swallow. "One of my warehouses was hit tonight. We lost a shipment worth $500,000 and 3 of my men are in the hospital." He set the glass down and leaned against the counter, and Naomi could see the weight he was carrying, the responsibility he felt for the people who worked for him. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. "Are your men going to be okay?" "Yes. Their families will be taken care of regardless. That is how we operate. We protect our own." Naomi moved closer, hesitating only a moment before reaching out to loosen his tie the rest of the way and slip it off his neck. "You protect everyone," she said softly. "But who protects you?" "Mateo." He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression surprised her. "No one," he admitted. "That is the price of leadership. You carry everything alone." "Not anymore," Naomi said. "You have me now. You have Daniel. You have family who cares about you. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Mateo's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. You are too good for me, he said roughly. Too good for this world I live in. And yet I find I cannot let you go. I am too selfish for that. I don't want you to let me go. Naomi turned her face to press a kiss to his palm. I want to be here, Mateo. With you and Daniel. Building something real together. You are certain. Because once I fully claim you, once I make you mine completely, I will not be able to let you go. You will be family, and family is forever in my world. I'm certain. Naomi rose up on her toes and kissed him, putting all her feelings into it, all the love and trust and desire she had been holding back. I'm yours, Mateo. However you want me, whenever you want me, I'm yours. Mateo made a sound low in his throat and lifted her, setting her on the kitchen counter so she was at his height. Then he was kissing her like a man starving, like he wanted to consume her, and Naomi wrapped her legs around his waist and gave herself over to it completely. They made it upstairs to his room eventually, and Mateo made love to her with a reverence and intensity that left her shaking, left her feeling utterly claimed and cherished in equal measure. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, Mateo pulled her close and spoke in Italian, the words flowing over her like silk. Naomi did not understand all of it, but she caught enough to know he was making promises, vows about protecting her and loving her and never letting her go. What did you say? She asked sleepily, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. I said you are my heart now, Mateo translated, pressing a kiss to her temple. You and Daniel. You are what I live for, and I will burn down the entire world before I let anything hurt either of you. That is my vow to you, Tesoro. Forever, forever, Naomi echoed, and let herself believe in happy endings for the first time in a long time. In the months that followed, Naomi settled into her new life with a contentment she had not known was possible. She went back to work part-time at CPS, with Mateo's financial support meaning she could take on fewer cases and focus on the children who needed her most. She spent her days caring for Daniel, who was growing fast and starting to smile and laugh and grab at everything in reach. She spent her evenings with Mateo, cooking dinner with Maria, sitting in the garden while Daniel played on a blanket, talking about everything and nothing. And slowly, carefully, Mateo introduced her to his world. She met his associates, the men who worked for him, and treated him with a respect that bordered on reverence. She attended family dinners where business was discussed in careful code, and she learned to read between the lines. She saw him dispense justice, both mercy and punishment, and came to understand the complex moral code he lived by. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was the life she had, and she was surprised to find that she was happy. Daniel was thriving, surrounded by love and security. Mateo was devoted, bringing her flowers for no reason and spending every free moment he had with his family. Maria had become the mother figure Naomi had not realized she was missing, teaching her and guiding her and treating her like she truly belonged. 6 months after moving into the brownstone, Mateo proposed. It was not a grand gesture, no restaurant reservation or public display. Instead, it was a quiet evening in the garden, with Daniel asleep in his arms and stars visible above them, despite being in the middle of Brooklyn. He told her that he wanted to make it official, wanted her to take his name and be his wife in the eyes of the law and the church and his family. He told her that he knew she had given up a lot to be with him, but that he hoped she felt it had been worth it. And then he pulled out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a single diamond, and asked her to marry him. Naomi said yes without hesitation. She had learned over the past 6 months that Mateo De Luca was a man of his word, that when he promised to protect something, he meant it with his whole being. She had learned that his love was fierce and unwavering, that he would move mountains to keep his family safe and happy. And she had learned that she loved him, not despite what he was, but because of the man he chose to be with the people he loved. They were married in a small ceremony 3 months later, with only close family and a few of Mateo's most trusted men in attendance. Maria cried through the entire ceremony, and Daniel, who was 10 months old by then, babbled happily through the vows, making everyone laugh. And when Mateo kissed Naomi at the Twendier altar, she felt like she had finally found her place in the world, her purpose, her home. That is the story of Naomi Hayes, the foster mom who found an abandoned baby on her doorstep and ended up finding a family, a love, and a life she never expected. Her story proves that sometimes the most dangerous choice leads to the safest love, that protection can come from the unlikeliest places, and that family is not always about blood but about who chooses you and who you choose in return. Naomi gave up her quiet, safe life to be with a man most people would call a criminal, but in doing so, she gained everything she had been missing. A partner who valued her strength, a child to love, a mother figure who treated her like a daughter, and a sense of belonging that she had been searching for her whole life. Years later, Naomi would sometimes think about that November night when she climbed the stairs to her apartment and found a baby on her doorstep. She would think about how easily she could have called the police and washed her hands of the situation, could have placed Daniel in the system and never looked back. She would think about how close she came to shutting the door on Mateo that first night, to choosing safety over the unknown. But she did not make those choices. She chose to protect Daniel, chose to give Mateo a chance, chose to trust her instincts even when they led her somewhere terrifying. And in return, she got a life full of love and purpose, and the kind of fierce protection most people only read about in books. Daniel grew up strong and happy, bilingual and confident, with his father's intensity and his foster mother turned adoptive mother's compassion. He knew where he came from, knew about the woman who had been too afraid to keep him, and the woman who had saved him when he needed it most. And he grew up watching his father treat his mother like a queen, watching a man who commanded fear and respect in the streets come home and become gentle, watching what true partnership looked like. Mateo never stopped looking at Naomi like she was the most precious thing in his world, never stopped protecting her and cherishing her and making sure she knew she was valued. He used his power and resources to help Naomi make changes in the foster care system, funding programs and pressuring politicians and making sure vulnerable children had better protections. And Naomi helped him remember his humanity, helped him find ways to use his influence for good, helped him be the kind of father and husband his son could be proud of. They were not perfect. There were arguments and disagreements and moments when Naomi had to confront things about Mateo's world that scared her. There were times when Mateo's protectiveness bordered on controlling and Naomi had to remind him that loving someone did not mean owning them. But they worked through it, together, because they had both learned that love was not about being perfect but about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. If dangerous love stories hook you, if you believe that protection and passion can go hand in hand, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We share new stories every week about real people who discovered that love can come from unexpected places and that sometimes the person who saves you is also the person you save. What did you think of Naomi and Mateo's story? Have you ever made a choice that scared you but turned out to be exactly what you needed? Would you have opened your door to Mateo that first night? Would you have taken the risk of letting someone dangerous into your life for a chance at something real? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories resonate with your own experiences of unexpected love, dangerous choices, and families built from choice rather than blood. Remember, sometimes the baby left on your doorstep is not just a child who needs saving. Sometimes it is the universe bringing you exactly what you have been missing, bringing you the family you were always meant to have, bringing you a love that will rewrite your entire future. And sometimes the most dangerous man is exactly the safe harbor you need. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next story.